Okay, let's go way back. I mean, all the way back. To the beginning. We're talking about the very cradle of civilization, ancient Mesopotamia. Now, this is a story about how we, as a species, built our very first cities, our first empires, but it's also got a darker side. It's a story about a fatal flaw, this pattern of self-destruction that just kept repeating itself for, get this, 3,000 years.
So, where does this all happen? Well, our story unfolds right here, in this amazing spot called the Fertile Crescent. It's the land tucked between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. You know, modern-day Iraq, plus bits of Syria and Turkey. The soil there was just incredibly rich, and all that water, it was the perfect incubator, really, for humanity's next giant leap.
And that brings us to the real mystery here, right? If this is where it all began, where civilization was born, then why couldn't it stick around? What was the fatal flaw? What was it that made these incredible societies just collapse? And not just once, but again and again for 3,000 years. It's kind of mind-boggling.
All right, so to find the answer, we've got to go back to square one. Let's talk about the very first people who ever decided to build a city.
So, let's meet the Sumerians. Around 3500 BCE, these guys did something absolutely revolutionary. They built the world's first cities. I'm talking about places like Uruk and Ur. And these weren't just big villages, okay? They were incredibly complex hubs of culture, religion, government, the whole shebang. And this changed everything about how human beings live together.
You know, what's really fascinating is how they were set up. Each city was basically its own independent country. We call them city-states. To put that in perspective, imagine if New York and Los Angeles were totally separate nations, each with its own god, its own army, its own king. That's kind of what the world of the Sumerians was like. Wild, right?
And the innovations that came out of these city-states? Whoa, they literally changed the world. We're talking about mastering irrigation to grow food, inventing the very first form of writing, cuneiform, and setting up these complex religious and government systems. They basically wrote the blueprint for civilization as we know it.
But, and this is a big but, this is where we see the first hint of that self-destruct button. These independent city-states, they were constantly at war with each other, fighting over land, water, power, you name it. And all that endless conflict just left them divided, weakened, and basically a perfect target for an outsider to swoop in and take everything.
And yeah, that's pretty much exactly what happened. All that internal weakness kicked off a totally new era, the Age of Empires. The goal wasn't independence anymore. Now it was all about unification, through brute force and conquest. So just look at this timeline. It shows you this absolutely relentless cycle. After the Sumerians, you get the Akkadians. Then they fall, and the Babylonians rise. Then the Assyrians. Then a brief Babylonian comeback before finally the Persians come in and conquer them all. It's like dominoes. Each new empire is literally built on the rubble of the last one.
Okay, so the first person to really break this pattern of warring cities was a guy named Sargon of Akkad. Around 2334 BCE, he just went in, conquered all the Sumerian city-states, and created the world's very first empire. For the first time ever, one single king was in charge of all of Mesopotamia. A huge deal.
Now, Sargon's big achievement was creating a centralized government. But see if this sounds familiar. The Akkadians just couldn't escape that old pattern. The cities they conquered, they were constantly trying to rebel and break free, which made things super unstable. And if that wasn't enough, they got hit with a massive, centuries-long drought that just wrecked their farms. So, they rose, and you guessed it, they fell.
All right, so out of the chaos of the Akkadian collapse, one city starts to climb to the top, Babylon. And under its most famous king, a ruler named Hammurabi, it becomes the beating heart of the next great Mesopotamian empire.
The Babylonians' biggest gift to the world? No doubt, it was the Code of Hammurabi. We're talking one of the first major written-down law codes in all of history. But here's their fatal flaw. Their whole system was built around one powerful guy. And you know, figuring out who comes next in an ancient monarchy was always a recipe for disaster. So after Hammurabi died, a bunch of weaker rulers took over, the empire got vulnerable, and yep, invaders came in and sacked it. The cycle just keeps on turning.
So who's next? The Assyrians. And their solution to keeping an empire together was pretty simple. Just use overwhelming, absolutely ruthless force. These guys built one of the most powerful and feared military machines the ancient world had ever seen. How'd they do it?
Superior tech.
They had iron weapons when others didn't, and these massive siege engines to knock down city walls. But in a classic twist, their greatest strength was also their greatest weakness. They expanded way too far, way too fast. And their legendary brutality? It made everyone hate them so much that eventually all the people they conquered teamed up, rose up, and completely wiped them off the map. Gone.
But wait, Mesopotamia had one last hurrah, one last gasp of being ruled by its own people. Enter the Neo-Babylonian Empire. Under kings like the famous Nebuchadnezzar II, they managed to recapture some of that old glory. This is the era of those legendary buildings you've heard of, like the Ishtar Gate and maybe even the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, though we're not totally sure they were real.
Yeah, but it didn't last long. In 539 BCE, a new powerhouse from the east, Cyrus the Great of Persia, just swept in and conquered Babylon. And just like that, the 3,000-year story of independent Mesopotamian civilization was over. From that point on, it was just another province in someone else's empire. The end of an era, for real.
So, all of this brings us right back to our big question. We've watched this cycle of rise and fall play out over and over again. Now let's really dig into the pattern behind it all.
So after thousands of years of incredible innovation, why did they all keep falling? What was the common thread? What's the one thing that unraveled every single one of these amazing societies, from the very first Sumerian cities all the way to that last Babylonian empire?
Well, here's the thing. It wasn't just one problem. It was this deadly cocktail of issues. You had constant warfare just draining all their resources. Then, their amazing irrigation systems over the centuries, they slowly poisoned the soil with salt. It's a process called salinization, which just destroyed their crops. You'd get a strong king, but then a series of weak ones would follow, creating a power vacuum. The empires got too big for their own good, and their brutal tactics just guaranteed rebellions. And on top of all that, they were rich, which meant they were always a juicy target for invasion. It was quite literally a perfect storm of failure, and it just kept repeating for 3,000 years.
But here's what's so important to remember. Even though the empires themselves are long gone, their legacy is everywhere. It's all around us. What they built, what they invented, it actually outlasted their own destruction.
Just think about it for a second. The idea of writing things down, that was them. The concept of a written law code for everyone to follow, also them. The idea of living in a city as the center of human life, them. Foundational ideas in math and astronomy, yep, them too. Even the very idea of what an empire is, all of these are basically gifts from Mesopotamia to the rest of us, to all of human history.
And that kind of leaves us with one last big thought. For 3,000 years, Mesopotamia was trapped in this cycle of incredible innovation followed by total collapse. And what drove it? War, environmental damage, political instability. So as we look at our own world today, with its challenges of climate change, global conflicts, and deep political divisions, you have to ask, right? What can its story teach us about our own? Have we actually learned anything from the story of the world's first and maybe most fragile